The new normal in Europe includes virtual summits where the 27 leaders of the EU stay behind a screen at home to review their common approach to the COVID pandemic. France's president scheduled to speak from the Élysée Palace shortly and field questions. We'll cross live to Emmanuel Macron's remarks. Leaders coming under pressure for a slow rollout of the vaccine. The 27 adopted the ambitious approach of ordering their jabs in bulk. They're also under pressure for failing to agree on the right balance for containing new virulent strains of the coronavirus. Some nations shutting borders without asking, others opting for localized lockdowns, each with separate rules on travel. And speaking of travel, what to make of vaccine passports, now a thing in Israel, and getting a second look in the UK as that former EU member looks to ease its lockdown. Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the way forward in fighting the pandemic. Joining us from Newcastle in England, we welcome back Dr. Stergios Moskos, Associate Professor of Cellular and Molecular Sciences at Northumbria University. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure.
From Geneva, health rights advocate Els Tureel, visiting fellow at the University College of London's Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose. Welcome to the show.
Good evening, everybody.
And from Brussels, France 24 correspondent Dave Keating. Dave, reassure me here, you're not just staring at screens when there are summits.
There's been a lot of staring at screens, I think, during this pandemic.
Oh dear. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Day one of two of a virtual EU summit where it's all about trying to pull together. Valerie de Kim has more.
European leaders are under pressure once again to hammer out their response to a global health crisis. But as the bloc of 27 gathers for a virtual summit, differences remain on a number of issues, starting with freedom of movement. Several countries, including France and Germany, are set to ramp up border controls. Meanwhile, Belgium has had its borders shut for nearly a month, banning all non-essential travel in and out of the country. Another point of contention, the introduction of vaccine certificates, which would ensure that only those who have been inoculated can move freely. Southern European countries dependent on tourism and other northern states support such a system.
Wir wollen alle so schnell wie möglich unser normales Leben wieder zurück. Wir wollen die Freiheit wieder zurück, innerhalb Europas zu reisen, ganz gleich, ob geschäftlich oder privat. Und wir wollen vor allem auch die Möglichkeit, dass wir wieder in Kulturveranstaltungen, in die Gastronomie, in die Hotellerie einfach hineingehen können und das auch genießen können.
Other EU countries don't share the same vision. France and Germany fear that vaccine passports would not only foster inequality, it would also be unworkable, as just 4% of the EU population has been vaccinated. Many citizens have yet to receive their second dose of the jab. Their approval has also been a source of tensions, Hungary even becoming the first EU country to break ranks and begin using vaccines developed by China and Russia.
Els Tureel, is there any problem with using vaccines developed by China and Russia?
Well, a priori, I don't see why there would be a problem with that. I think the Russian vaccine data have now been published in a renowned medical journal, and the data look very good. We don't necessarily have the full transparency yet about the Chinese vaccines. We're still waiting for the data, but I don't see a reason why these would not be, if they are turned out to be safe and effective, why not using them? I think we need to use as many possible sources of vaccine in the world because we need to increase the number of people that can get vaccinated, not just in Europe, actually in the whole world, because I think it has been said many times before, we're only as safe as everybody is safe, and so we can't just isolate ourselves here in Europe.
Dave Keating, what's the problem with Hungary going rogue and ordering its own vaccines?
Well, on Sputnik, it's actually not a problem, the Commission says, because Sputnik isn't part of the Commission's vaccine portfolio of purchases, nor has it been authorized by the EMA. The Commission's line here is that Hungary or any other country is free to authorize the Sputnik vaccine or a Chinese vaccine because they are free to do so. They don't need to wait for EMA approval. Any country could have authorized any of the vaccines earlier than the EMA. And for purchasing, it's outside of the procurement, so it's okay. But then there's what countries can legally do and what they should do. And of course, there's concern that if you get just a handful of countries approving Sputnik, if they do only approve it nationally, it means that vaccine can only be used nationally. And the fear is, of course, you could get say the Sputnik vaccine traveling around Europe to countries where it isn't authorized. And in a single market with open borders, that's a bit of a problem. So legally, not so much of a problem. Logistically, possibly a problem. It should be noted, Sputnik, Russia has still not applied for EMA approval for the Sputnik vaccine. The Commission is a little confused as to why they're not applying, because Moscow seems to be saying they want to apply, they're ready to apply. Why haven't they done it? We're not sure. But the line from the Commission is they are open to all vaccines, and there isn't any reason to distrust the Sputnik vaccine more than any of the others. They're all going to go through the same approval process at the EMA.
Dave, when you look now at what's on the agenda at this summit, high on every leader's mind is the fact that, well, the EU, it was ambitious, right, with this idea of buying the vaccine doses in bulk, and it's now behind.
Yeah, I mean, there is still unanimous support for the EU's joint procurement process. There is an understanding that if the EU hadn't done this, yes, maybe France and Germany might be better off, but every other EU country would have been worse off. Study after study has shown this, because the big countries would have bought up all the vaccine, and smaller countries like Ireland, Croatia, even medium-sized countries like Italy and Spain probably would have been disadvantaged. And even President Macron and Chancellor Merkel recognized this as well, that if you had a situation where Germany and France were vaccinating everybody at a super fast pace, but the other countries in the EU weren't, that doesn't do them a lot of good. So there is still strong support for the joint procurement approach. The problem is, of course, that the rollout has been extremely slow in most EU countries, not all. Some EU countries are doing quite well. Malta is vaccinating about the same rate as the United States, as about the same proportion of its population. Denmark is supposed to have all adults vaccinated by the end of June, but some countries like France are not doing well. A lot of that is because of situations on the ground, logistics problems, a lack of preparation by these national governments. And right now, in this summit that the EU leaders are just about wrapping up right now, they're talking about what can be done to coordinate between them to try to speed up this vaccine rollout, which has been quite slow.
Yeah, we're something like 4% in this country, Stergios Moskos. And, on the show, we've been critical in the past of the UK Prime Minister when it comes to his public health policy. But in this case, taking a risk, going for it when it comes to the vaccine rollout, it's paid off, hasn't it?
Well, it is certainly achieving a lot more penetrance of the vaccine across the population than other places anticipated. I think a lot of it has to do with this rolling approval process that was put in place by the MHRA, meaning that as the data came out from the manufacturers, the regulators were able to look at the data and assess whether or not the vaccine itself was safe and effective. This meant that you had faster approval, and as a result of that, it was possible to start distributing the vaccine earlier. I think that had a lot to play in this process.
And regarding the EU, as a Greek, what's your view on the fact that this joint procurement, this bulk buying is slower than in the UK?
I think 2020 and 2021 are two very good years to take stock of what we're not doing right, all of us. Doesn't matter whether we're talking about our own home or our union, and think about how we can do things better. We were forced to do things differently because of sheer need. Now it's an opportunity to take a moment and think carefully about what we can do better in the future, and forget about the set ways that we have, but look at improving as dramatically as this virus made us change our lifestyles.
So last week, the UK Prime Minister rejected the idea of biometric vaccine passports. But Boris Johnson, who we can show you visiting a school in Lancashire ahead of its March 8th reopening, says he's now ordered a review of vaccine passports, or as he calls them, COVID status certificates.
When you look at the international side of things, international travel, there's no question that that's where a lot of people, a lot of countries will be going, and they will be insisting on vaccine passports in the way that people used to insist on evidence that you've been inoculated against yellow fever or whatever. So it's going to come on the international stage, whatever.
Vaccine passports, Sturgis Moskos, why this reversal? Why now are they a good idea?
I'm not sure what may have changed the government's opinion about this, but there is a number of things that is being discussed at various levels. Vaccine passports is one of them. Border testing, mid-flight testing, on-arrival testing, whatever you want to call it, is another. We saw what the consequences of international travel prematurely were last year. We're still talking from each other's bedrooms right now because of that. But when it comes to the vaccinations, one alarm that needs to be raised is around the fact that the vaccines protect the individual that has been vaccinated. They don't necessarily protect as well the individuals that have not been vaccinated around them. We haven't got what's known as sterile immunity, and a good chunk, 20 to 30% of those that have been vaccinated by whatever vaccine, they have the capacity to carry on them the virus. Whether or not they transmit the virus is an entirely different story, and I'm not convinced as yet that we've got enough data to answer that question. So the countries who are thinking about trade and tourism as to their lifeblood, and the countries who are thinking about trade and tourism as their release, so the north-south divide of Europe, for example, they should think carefully about what is at stake here. Are we going to give the virus the opportunity to get a toehold to evolve beyond the vaccines, and then we're back to square one? Or are we just going to stranglehold the vaccine, get through this, and get to the point where the virus basically, because of the vaccination drive, is going to be contained effectively? My vote goes for the latter.
Elstorila, earlier this week, the UK sets out a timetable for loosening lockdown. And since then, we were reporting on in our business segment how there's been a rush to book holidays for the summer. But listening to Sturgis Moskos, it's too soon. You agree?
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And I want to come back to this concept of vaccine passports, which I think, honestly, is totally nonsensical at this stage. I mean, the comparison with the yellow fever vaccine doesn't make sense at all, because we know that the yellow fever vaccine actually, we know how it works and how long it works and how well it works. There are so many questions, as was already referred to, still outstanding about the current vaccines for COVID, not only about whether it protects against infection and transmission, but also for how long. Is it 6 months? Is it 9 months? Are all the vaccines going to be given the same type of protection? What about the new variants? So what does it mean if you get a passport that says that you have been vaccinated with vaccine X at a certain date? What does it tell you about your status, about being protected yourself, and indeed about your capacity to transmit the virus? So as long as we don't really know how well the vaccines protect and for how long, I don't think that it makes sense. But there is the other point, and I think that I want to emphasize, is that it would just be a way to enhance even the very stark inequities we already have around vaccines. And you would actually punish and discriminate those that are not being able to get a vaccine even more than what we are already doing today. And I think for that reason, vaccine passports today are totally nonsensical.
Totally nonsensical. We're going to pick up on that point. When we come back, you're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're speaking on day 1 of 2 of a virtual EU summit where it's all about going faster in containing the COVID pandemic as new variants hit the continent. With us from Newcastle, Dr. Stergios Moskos, Associate Professor of Cellular and Molecular Sciences at Northumbria University. Joining us from Geneva, health rights advocate Els Torila, visiting fellow at University College London's Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose, and from Brussels, France 24 correspondent Dave Keating. Els Torila, who in part 1 of our discussion said all this talk of vaccine passports that's being touted by the like of Austria's chancellor is totally nonsense, she says. But just ask Yaron. He's a regular patron of a gym in the Israeli town of Ramat Gan, Israel, where since Sunday, you can now show these green badge apps that mean that, well, they've reopened not just gyms, but also restaurants and concert halls. And he's so happy to be back.
מעולה, זה היה חסר מאוד. עכשיו שיש דרכון ירוק, רוצים להתחסן, זה הכי כיף שבעולם.
I've got my green passport. This is the greatest fun of all. Els, what would you say to Yaron?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we all want to go back to some normal life, and I totally sympathize with that. But I think we need to be realistic. Today, we don't know yet what that protection means, and so a passport doesn't tell us anything. It might well be that next day someone comes into the gym with one of these new variants, and you're not protected, or you're actually spreading it yourself. So I think it's too early for these vaccine passports, and we need to actually combine different measures trying to get the transmission down by vaccination, by continuing to protect ourselves, distancing, masks, and etc., until we can actually get our head around and lowering the transmission to levels that we can start living with. But selectively also having those people who have had a chance to get a vaccine, because don't forget that many people would love to have a vaccine, but we don't have enough vaccines yet, even in Europe, let alone in the rest of the world. And so are we going to discriminate those that actually, not by their choice, but just because there are no vaccines available or they can't get them, cannot then take back their freedom? I don't think that that's a justice and an equitable approach.
All right, so Dave Keating, you've heard our other 2 panelists strongly suggesting there that it's way too soon to be talking about vaccine passports. Of course, there's public health, and then there's politics. So what are you expecting from this summit on that score?
Well, I'm hearing that there was support from most EU leaders for the idea of coordinating a vaccine passport and possibly making it digital. That's the latest that I'm hearing. We may hear more about that from the press conferences to follow. I think the key thing for the EU leaders is that they feel like these are going to happen no matter what. Their countries are going to start requiring this of visitors. We've already got reports that Czech Republic and Hungary are working on something between the 2 of them. And so that if they don't coordinate this, you're going to get a patchwork of vaccination requirements in terms of documentation and information across the EU that's not compatible. So the idea here is to start now working on every country deciding what needs to be on every single one of those vaccine passports, what information, how do you verify it, and that way every country can recognize each other's passports, and then how those countries actually want to use them is something to be determined later. So it's a tightrope that they're going to have to walk. I think we're going to hear from President Charles Michel after this summit exactly that the vaccine passports, it is still too early to be thinking about deploying them, but at this stage they just want to make sure they coordinate what information is on them so you don't get 27 different vaccination certificates in the EU that aren't compatible with each other.
Stergios Moskos, as reported there by Dave Keating, is it a good idea what EU leaders are pondering?
Do you know what? I was a bit okay with it maybe with the start of the program, but in the meantime, I've actually found out that Israel, the country with the most vaccinated people in the world, is going to reinstate isolation hotels for anybody traveling from abroad. And it's not apparently specific to foreign travelers. It looks like it's actually going to be applied even to its own population. So if the country with the most vaccinations doesn't feel comfortable about its citizens going abroad, that tells you all you need to know. I don't think we're in anywhere near the position to be talking about vaccine passports. And I need to take up the point about inequality raised earlier. We took the decision early in this pandemic that key workers must be able to go to work. But I don't hear anything from pretty much any country at the moment about vaccinating those key workers to protect them. Now we're going to be talking about people who cannot afford to go traveling because they've lost their jobs or because whatever's happened to them in the last year, are going to be basically holding up the door for everyone else, and they will end up the ones that are going to be suffering going forward. So no, I think the European Union needs to basically stand up and say, look, guys, we are all at risk out of this if we go traveling or if we're going to receive travelers. So let's behave as a union for a difference.
All right, behaving as a union was what we didn't see when it came to the initial lockdown. Everyone was scared, and we had different measures in different countries. We reported on how at the French side of the German border, they were shocked to see barriers come up for the first time in decades. Now we're looking at different strategies in different countries, and that's also on the agenda at this summit. And by the way, it's a mixed picture when it comes to the infection rate. Drastically down in parts with localized spikes, like here in France, the kinds that are forcing weekend lockdowns around the French Riviera city of Nice and around the northern port city of Dunkirk. Here you see a chart with the infection rates that are varying. And, well, effectively, we don't quite know. In nearly 3/4 of EU member states, Elsterila, the infection rate is on the way down, but it's not the case everywhere. I can think of Sweden, the Czech Republic, and here in France, where the Prime Minister stopped just shy of imposing another lockdown in remarks earlier. Do we have any certainty as to why the infection rates go up or down?
No, I think that you nail it there. I think there are so many questions. We are still observing ups and downs without often understanding why. We know that certain measures do help. We know that distancing helps, lockdown help, but of course we can't stay in lockdown all the time. But what I think, the one thing we've learned is that we may want to move away from a one-size-fits-all approach and go much more granularly in trying to cut transmission change at a local level and maybe not have nationwide measures. We can see that some of the countries that have done better, maybe for reasons that are beyond their own control, but have been much more stronger on cutting local transmission. They are doing well. Once you have massive transmission everywhere, you can't do that anymore. Then you need much broader measures. I think we're still learning, but I think one of the things with the vaccine is that we have all wished that this was the silver bullet that would get us out of the pandemic. I think many scientists have said that all along. Vaccines are not silver bullets. They will be one probably important element to the strategy, vaccines together with all the other measures that we've been taking. But so we need to kind of keep going and keep combining and learning, because we learn every day how to do it better, and then be very differentiated in our approach. And I want to come back to something that the World Health Organization has said from the beginning. Our priority in vaccination should be those most vulnerable and the healthcare force, the health workforce, because that's our first line of defense for everybody. When we get sick, we want to have healthcare workers taking care of us. Can we please do that with the vaccines that we have available, not just in our countries, but in the rest of the world, and then gradually rising the number of people that can get vaccinated, instead of trying to be so focused on ourselves. In Europe, we need to vaccinate massively because there is a major transmission, but let's not forget that we also protect the most vulnerable and the health force in the rest of the world. That is a real priority for all of us together.
Well, Dave Keating, where you are in Belgium, are key workers, not just hospital workers, but all essential workers. Are they getting vaccines?
No, it's just hospital workers for the moment. I'm not sure. I think that they are in the next round for the schedule. I don't know that offhand, but I think that those frontline workers, so in other words, people that are working in stores, they are, of course, at a really big risk, and I believe they are in the next tier. Belgium is catching up fairly quickly. Belgium was really, really slow at first with the vaccine rollout, but it is picking up pace now.
The vaccine rollout's been slow, and there's also been mixed messages from EU leaders, especially when it comes to AstraZeneca, which has the advantage of having this vaccine that you don't need to store at such cold temperatures, but they failed to deliver the number of doses they promised. There were doubts over the effectiveness in the vaccines in over 65s. A month ago, President Macron of France spoke of its ineffectiveness when he spoke to reporters. In fact, EU regulators had simply stated that the pharmaceutical company needs to provide more data, but he had said that it was quasi-ineffective. And despite that distinction that I'm stressing here, there seems to be lingering results. We saw scenes in Austria where hospital staff went on strike saying they didn't want the AstraZeneca jab. And there's an uphill battle to restore that vaccine's reputation. Yinko Iatade has more.
Reassurance that they are still on track. That was the message from the CEO of AstraZeneca Italy. Speaking to the Corriere della Sera, Lorenzo Whittam said,
I confirm that we will deliver 180 million doses to Europe in the second quarter of the year, of which 20 million will go to Italy.
The comment comes amid speculation that the Anglo-Swedish drug maker would fall short of its promise to supply the bloc with its 180 million doses by June. This after an EU official told Reuters that it would deliver less than 90 million doses in the second quarter. It's not the first time AstraZeneca's deal with the EU has come under scrutiny. The bloc had been let down by the drug maker back in January when it announced it would deliver 75 million doses less than promised during the first 3 months of the year. A shortfall that could negatively affect the EU's target to vaccinate 70% of its adult population by the summer. While battling supply issues, some member states are also struggling to assure the public over concerns about the efficacy of AstraZeneca's vaccine. Officials have had to plead with Germans to get the vaccine as doses went unused across the country.
Alle Impfstoffe, die in Deutschland zur Verfügung stehen, sind sicher und sind wirksam und alle schützen vor einer Covid-19-Erkrankung. Und nach allem, was wir wissen, schützen sie auch vor Erkrankungen mit den neuen Varianten.
In France, GPs are set to start administering shots of AstraZeneca's vaccine to priority patients aged between 50 and 64 this week.
Yeah, in fact, as of today, general practitioners here in France can administer that AstraZeneca vaccine to people the age group that are who have pre-existing conditions between 50 and 65. Stergios Maskos, your reaction to the fact that in Germany they wound up with people who didn't want the AstraZeneca vaccine anymore?
Hey, bring it to me. I've got a wife, myself, and a child. This has not been tested in children yet, and I'd gladly give it to my 3-year-old son. So I'm afraid, asking to drive a limousine when you're actually trying to outrun, I don't know, a snowstorm or something like that is actually a little bit off color here. I think if people want to go on holiday, if they want to do the vaccine passports and all of that, they better take the vaccine that's available to them. And even then, I would say the skepticism generally should be about the new variants and the level of protection that we will get. We will be not ending up in ICU, but we might still get ill. And what the knock-on effect of that might be in the future is what we need to be paying attention. So let's reopen society and economy by getting vaccines on board, whatever vaccines come to us, and then start thinking about luxuries.
And in fairness to the UK Prime Minister, Boris Johnson's talking about booster shots of the vaccine come the fall because of those variants.
Yes, so first of all, originally there was a chance taken around boosting 3 months as opposed to within a month of getting the first dose. And a lot of us, including myself, said, hang on a second, we haven't tested this. Why are you so positive about something like that? There was a lot of scientific basis, but when it comes to giving drugs to people, you have to test what they do before you actually approve something for the general public. But it was a correct bet. And now this is going to be a good thing to go forward to boost with another dose 3 months apart. That creates time to make the new variant vaccines, and hopefully this whole strategy will work much better. I'm very much inclined to say that it's probably better to make sure that we get protection against the main strain, sustain a reasonable, not lockdown level, but reasonable amount of physical distancing between people, to not give breathing space to the new variants, and try to create time so that the studies are done properly, and also the virus itself can fizzle out in the absence of a transmission chain. If we get 78% suppression of transmission, we have a fighting chance to prevent those other variants from coming through. So let's just take what we know works.
Els Torilla, I wanted to ask you, what's your religion when it comes to all we've been hearing about AstraZeneca?
Well, I think that the key word here is we don't have enough transparency. We don't have enough transparency both at the level of the data, the study data. I mean, the way, and it's not just AstraZeneca, all of the companies, they have communicated piecemeal certain aspects of the data that they are seeing in their studies. With decisions of purchasing and starting to roll out already being taken before there were peer-reviewed scientific publications. We learn more in the press releases that are actually drafted for financial markets than in the public health media about what actually we have learned about these vaccines. And that, I think, has created also a lot of the space for worries and not well understanding and for miscommunication, etc. And then there is the question about transparency on the contracts. I mean, the whole discussion between AstraZeneca and the European Commission, but it's more broadly, we don't know what is exactly in the contracts, how much we pay for each of the vaccines. Why are these prices so different? When are they going to be delivered? And I think the bottom line there is that we need to realize that we have a system of pharmaceutical innovation where we leave everything, all the control, in the hands of a handful of pharmaceutical companies, and then from whom we are now dependent for the supply, for the knowledge, for the details about the safety and the efficacy of the vaccines. That, I think, is one of the reasons why there is also so many space for rumors and guessing. We're all guessing what exactly do we know about these vaccines. I know that the companies must have many more data than what we have today, because the data that we have are mostly based on interim analysis that some for Pfizer and Moderna date from November. We're 3 months later, and we haven't gotten any more data. And so I think this is, for me, the bottom line, that we need much more transparency, and therefore we need a much stronger public control towards the companies to demand that. We have so much leverage that we are not using, I think.
Dave Keating, are EU leaders demanding more?
Can I interject there a little bit?
Go ahead.
Sorry to interject there. I've done my time in large industry and pharma industry, so I can speak from both sides. I'm an academic now. The data that you're talking about are the data that's been disclosed to the public domain. Some of it's been published in peer-reviewed journals, etc. Great. There's a lot of data that goes to the regulators that you and I as academics never see. And I'm aware of that because I was one of those people putting the data in the hand of the regulators once many moons ago. So if the regulators are happy, then the governments should be happy. Now, I agree with you that individuals like yourself and myself can go out there and communicate that information more simply and more clearly to the lay public and improve upon the understanding and acceptance. But at the same time, we also have a responsibility to ensure that the information that's disclosed to the authorities is clearly told about as being clear to the authorities and not to the academics.
All
We
right,
are academics. We're not the
Dave
authorities.
Keating, because we're running short on time here. That question of EU leaders pushing the pharmaceutical companies for more accountability. I know it's come up in the European Parliament. As we go forward, there's going to be a lot more vaccine doses to buy, listening to our other two panelists. So this is an issue.
Yeah, and will the EU buy them from AstraZeneca? That's the big question. There is no doubt that there is very little trust at this point between EU politicians and AstraZeneca. And this afternoon, AstraZeneca's CEO, Pascal Soriot, appeared before the European Parliament, and it was his job to reassure the lawmakers. But from what I can see, he really didn't. I mean, we heard from AstraZeneca's man in Italy that yes, for sure, we're going to meet our commitments in second quarter. But Soriot appeared a lot less certain about that in this European Parliament hearing that just wrapped up. He said hopefully they'll have enough in the second quarter. And from what I can see, the EU leaders who are having their European Council summit right now, they were also watching that European Parliament hearing. They don't seem to have been reassured. I'm hearing that they asked the European Commission to get much tougher on this question of potential export bans, that they need to essentially threaten AstraZeneca and say, if you don't give us what you promised, at least in the second quarter, we will pull the trigger on this and we will not allow you to export vaccines doses that have been made in the EU out of the EU. I think we'll get more clarification on what exactly was said here in the past hours, particularly from President Macron when he does his press conference. But things are very, very tense between the EU and that company in particular. And I'm not sure that today's appearance by the CEO at the European Parliament did much to fix that.
All right, we're going to see how it pans out at this summit. I want to thank you, Dave Keating, for joining us from Brussels, where you're covering it all for us. Dr. Stergios Moskos in Newcastle, from Geneva, Els Torila, thank you for joining us. And we want to thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.